In this discussion, watches are referenced solely as tangible personal property and collectible real-world assets that an ultra-high net worth individual or family office client may encounter. Any reference to such items in an investment context is used strictly in a descriptive and practical sense and should not be interpreted as financial, investment, valuation, or transactional advice of any kind. Rockefeller Global Family Office does not endorse, recommend, evaluate, arrange, facilitate, or provide advice or services relating to the acquisition, ownership, valuation, pricing, purchase, sale, or disposition of watches or any other collectibles or real assets. This discussion is provided exclusively for general informational and educational purposes, is illustrative in nature only, and is not intended to be relied upon for decision-making. No representations or warranties, express or implied, are made regarding the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of the information for any particular purpose. Eugene Tatunikov is a current client of Rockefeller Financial LLC. The statements made constitute a testimonial reflecting the client's personal experience and opinions and may not be representative of the experience of other clients. The client was not compensated directly or indirectly for providing this testimonial. However, as a current client, Mr. Tatunikov has an existing business relationship with Rockefeller Financial LLC, which creates a material conflict of interest as the client may have an incentive to provide a favorable testimonial. There is no guarantee that any brokerage or advisory services described will result in similar outcomes for other clients. Past performance is not indicative of future results. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. This testimonial is provided for informational and advertising purposes only. Brokerage and investment advisory services are offered by Rockefeller Financial LLC, an SEC-registered broker-dealer and investment advisor, and a member of FINRA SIPC. Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Financial Longevity, the Merlin Wealth Management Educational Podcast. In each episode, Michael Merlin, founder of Merlin Wealth Management, along with various experts, breaks down complex financial topics to help you increase your wealth span and gain the confidence to enjoy your bigger future. For more information about Merlin Wealth Management, please visit our website at rocco.com/Merlin. You can also find Michael's book, Financial Longevity, on Amazon, Audible, or wherever books are sold. And with that, here's founder of Merlin Wealth Management, Michael Merlin.
Thanks, Tom, and welcome back to Financial Longevity, the Merlin Wealth Management Educational Podcast, where we explore how to build, protect, and ultimately pass on lasting wealth. Today, we're diving into a fascinating corner of the alternative investment world, which is really collectibles. You know, we talk a lot about traditional alternatives, private equity, real estate, but we're not often discussing the stores of value that purchasing collectibles like art, cars, or in this case, with our guest today on our podcast, luxury watches, can mean for a person's overall net worth and for their investment portfolio, so to speak. For a lot of people, watches, like I mentioned, cars, art, or wine even, start as a passion, but over time, they can really develop into meaningful and sometimes substantial assets. So today, I'm really excited to have one of my dear friends, Eugene Tatunikov, on our podcast today. He is the CEO of SwissWatchExpo. We are going to talk about how to think about watches as part of your overall wealth strategy, the biggest mistakes that watch quote unquote investors make. And, one of the most overlooked questions that Eugene really brought to my attention, which is what happens to a watch collection when the owner passes away, and how can you make sure that that's not a burden on their family? So with that, I'm excited to get into it and welcome my friend Eugene Tatunikov to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun for everyone.
I'm excited about it too. So before we get into the meat of it, let's start from the beginning. I knew you a long time ago as a Wall Street guy, but now you're you're the CEO of a luxury watch business. Tell us kind of about your journey, how you got to this point, and what ultimately led you to SwissWatchExpo.
Yeah, we have a very interesting story. This is a family business. We came over from the former Soviet Union in the late 80s, modern day Ukraine. Came over as refugees, as Biggie Small says, with a dollar and a dream. Uh, and I started my career on Wall Street. So I went to NYU for finance, econ, and math, and I spent about 10 years as a prop trader and sell side trader in fixed income derivatives. My parents started this business in 2009, and they convinced me to join, and I joined in 2016 with the goal of scaling the company to be the premier online seller for pre-owned luxury watches. And the reason they started the business is my stepfather was managing a Rolex service center all through the 90s in Atlanta, Georgia. So that was the genesis of the business. And um, since I joined, we've scaled it to be one of the largest players in the space globally. We actually, this is the first time I think, mentioning it publicly that we surpassed 100 million in revenues last year for the first
Wow.
time. Where unlike a lot of companies these days, there's no venture capital behind it. We'll start with very little capital and grown organically. Since I joined, I think we've grown about 12x. We typically carry around 2,500 to 3,000 watches and over $40 million worth of watches that we own outright in-house. These are all watches under one roof in Atlanta, Georgia, which is probably the largest collection of watches in one place in the world right now, at least unit-wise. And we think there's a bright future now. We're focused on how to get to 200 million.
It's unbelievable, and definitely a business we don't have to talk about AI disintermediation. It's a see, touch, and taste business. It's a passion business.
Yeah, I don't think AI is gonna in any way lessen the demand for luxury watches. It's really interesting. So 3 weeks ago, somebody that didn't even have a conversation with the sales team went on our website, spent $90,000 on a beautiful watch, and I was curious who this person is because usually most of our sales go through our sales team with a very high touch approach. Even we have the local business which you get to experience, Michael, but 90% is online. But even the online business usually involves a lot of video calls and conversations with our sales team, which they love to do. But this person didn't contact us, so I looked him up, and he's like a 32-year-old co-founder of an AI company that just got valued at $10 billion. So my point is, AI is only going to help our business, I think, not hurt it.
I think people are going to have more time to go searching for passion projects and
Yeah,
collecting watches. As your stepdad Jake says to me all the time, collecting watches is one of the best hobbies you can have.
of course, for sure.
So let's get into a little bit to the luxury watch market. A lot of our listeners may not understand the market. So talk a little bit about it and what's changed the most over the last several years from the buyer and seller perspective.
Sure. So 2020, everybody was stuck at home with a lot of disposable income. They weren't traveling, they weren't eating out, and a lot of watch collectors decided to drastically increase their collection. And it was the same time that some of the manufacturers were shut down for part of the time and scaling back production due to the pandemic. So the watch market became a bit of a euphoria. It went crazy. Everyone's going online, spending money on watches. Watch prices, some of them doubled in the course of 6 to 9 months. Everybody was chasing the hot watch. That also led to a lot of smaller players, not like us, to enter the space. One or two guys in a basement somewhere shipping watches to make a few bucks. They did not have the capability to authenticate the watches, service the watches, but the market was red hot. And then what's interesting, which I think your listeners will appreciate, it started to cool around the same time the Federal Reserve started to raise rates. So in the spring of 2022 is when you could say the watch bubble of that period popped. So a lot of the hottest watches, like I said, the Royal Oaks, the Daytonas, that doubled, then over the next year and a half fell by 40% or so in price because there was just such a euphoria during the pandemic that went away. Since then, the market's kind of settled into the normal state of things. most people are not buying a watch like they were to hope to sell it 6 months later for a profit. They're buying a watch that they want to wear, they want to own, that adds to their collection, that speaks to them. So it's going back to the consumers buying watches for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons, which makes for a much healthier market. Um, what's also changed in the last several years is if you go back 20 years, if you wanted to buy a luxury watch, you couldn't really buy much online, at least without the risk of being, heavily ripped off. Now consumers are much more comfortable spending large sums of money amounts online. There's a lot more protections in place, both for the seller and the buyer during the process. So a lot of the luxury watch market has actually moved online. That's why, most of our growth has been online the last 10 years. And it's been a good evolution in the market. The pre-owned market is growing at about 12% a year, according to most studies cited by BCG and other consulting companies. And the new market's only growing at 3 or 4%. So the pre-owned market has really developed into a very robust, liquid asset class and a market that consumers are very comfortable participating in. We have customers on a regular basis coming to us, and it's their first ever luxury watch purchase is a pre-owned watch from us. We don't sell new, we sell only pre-owned, which 15 years ago, unless you were a super collector connoisseur of watches, you would not have considered buying pre-owned. Now it's normal for somebody buying their first luxury watch to be a pre-owned watch. So I would say those are the big evolutions that happened in the last handful of years.
Yeah. Is a big component of that, Eugene, the fact that it's much harder to get these watches from a retail standpoint now? Like you can't just walk into a Rolex store and say you want a Daytona.
That's a big part of it, but that was always the case.
Okay.
If you go back 10 or 15 years. And what surprises people, the majority of the inventory that we sell is actually sold at less than the retail price.
Right.
So yes, a Rolex Daytona does sell for multiples of retail, but we have 400 Cartier watches in stock, and almost pretty much all of them we're selling at under retail. So a lot of them you can get a Cartier, but we're selling them at 20, 30, 40% less than retail, which is the normal state of affairs for the pre-owned market. It's only the few really hot models that have the long wait lists that sell over retail. But the majority of the pre-owned market is actually people go to it because there's value compared to buying new.
Absolutely. So it's a great segue into kind of talking about the watches as as an asset class almost. If someone says to you, I want to treat my watch portfolio like an investment portfolio, how do you think about that? And is there a healthy way to look at that? And then are there red flags to that in your mind?
I think primarily one shouldn't buy watches to make money on them. You should buy watches that speak to you. You appreciate the heritage of them, the design, you want to wear them. Watches do keep their value very, very well through time, and some of them do indeed increase in value. Lately we've seen a pretty sharp increase in gold watches, especially from the 80s and 90s, which is not surprising given that gold is up over 70% over the last 18 months. But to treat building a watch portfolio as far as an investment portfolio, it's similar to what you do for your customers. Diversification matters. You should stick to the top brands: Rolex, Patek Philippe, and AP. All three companies are actually private companies. They're not publicly owned, which means they can focus on their supply and developing their brand for the next 100 years and not worry about making any quarterly earnings. So, we know they will never flood the market. Rolex could make a lot more money selling 10 times more Daytonas than they currently sell. They don't do it because they're thinking about their brand and the brand value for the next 100 years. And so does AP and Patek Philippe. They do the same thing. They don't have investors they have to answer to. So just like your investments, I think diversification matters. I would stick to the top three brands. You want to diversify across different metals. So you want dress watches and sports watches, and just like in the stock market, things, popularity of the watches changes. So certain years we would see a premium price for blue dial watches, sports model blue dial watches, because they were highly in demand. Other years the white dial would have a premium price to the same model that's a blue dial. So some diversification helps, but the main point is to really create value in your watch portfolio. It's smart to buy pre-owned. Typically the most value is in that 10 to 25-year-old watch range. If you're buying the latest release, the hottest watch, it has less appreciation potential than a 10 or 25-year-old watch. Buying pre-owned because there's value. Oftentimes you get it under the retail price, and then having diversification in your portfolio. But for the most part, you know, you're not going to get a huge return on your watch portfolio, because there's also a lot of transaction costs. There's sales tax. There's servicing the watch every 5-6 years, insuring the watch. So there's a lot of carry costs and transaction costs in keeping a watch portfolio. But for most of our customers, if they have 100, 200, $300,000 in their watches that they're wearing, and 5 or 10 years later they go to sell them and they get what they paid for them, they would consider that a great experience because they got to enjoy a luxury product. They really appreciate it and they got their money back. So it's a very
Yeah.
especially, well, that's why I think when the Fed raised rates, some of the watch prices started to cool, because when rates are zero, there's, for a person that's a uh, enthusiastic watch collector, there's no opportunity cost in keeping their money in watches, because a lot of them were sitting on millions of dollars in their checking account yielding zero, and they said, well, might as well buy some watches and wear those watches, even if I just get my money back in a few years.
Absolutely. My brother, who's in the collectible car business, says the same thing. When in 22, when rates, when rates were low before 22, and when the market was kind of top heavy, he's like, look, if you bought a Ferrari, you could drive it, have fun, probably get at least what you paid for it, if not maybe a little bit more if you tried to sell it later on, and it's not correlated to anything going on in the stock bond,
Yeah.
or other markets. So I totally get that part of it. I think so. So from what you said, and I completely agree with you and see the alignment kind of with what we do. From an investment standpoint, obviously we're focused on highest quality companies, et cetera, et cetera. So focusing on the best brands, scarcity value, market sentiment. You mentioned. Talk a little bit though, because I think this is really a differentiator about your business. Talk a little bit about condition and provenance. I know that one of the misconceptions out there about buying watches in the pre-owned market is a concern about them not being real, or a concern about them being, in bad condition, or, as you said, kind of being duped in some way, shape, or form. But you guys really, take that very seriously at Swiss Watch. And I just talk a little bit about that and how collectors or, watch enthusiasts should think about that.
Yeah, since my stepfather is a master trained watchmaker and he's one of the founders of the company, our watchmaking department is really the backbone of the business. There are millions of fake replica watches being sold every year. Now, most of them are very cheap fakes that you and I could spot easily, but some small percentage are called super fakes. So unlike most watch dealers, we have an in-house 13-person watchmaking department. Every watch that we buy is opened up. Every component is verified to be authentic, verified to be original to the model that we are selling. Because there's also what's called Frankenstein watches. So, 5-year-old watch with 25-year-old parts in it, which decreases the value, especially if the parts are for a different model of, even if they're original. So we authenticate every watch. We service, repair every watch before selling it, and we also polish and finish it professionally to manufacturer standards. So if you bought a pre-owned watch elsewhere, just the service alone, if you have to send it to a manufacturer, it's probably going to run you $1,000, and take 3 to 9 months, which is not a good experience if you bought a watch and then you have to send it away a week later and won't see it for 9 months. So we are that watchmaking department. They're absolutely obsessed with quality. I mean, they'll see a little nick on a watch and they won't let it go on our website, or they'll delay a shipment that's supposed to go out that day, which doesn't happen often because they have to give it a little bit of a buffing and make sure it looks perfect. So they are extremely obsessed with the quality of our inventory. We're known to deal in the highest quality in the pre-owned market, but for our pre-owned customer, which is part of why our business has done so well. Like I mentioned, in 2020, 2021, there were a lot of smaller players that did not have this authentication or refurbishment capability that we have. But consumers are becoming smart. They're realizing they can't just go to the pawn shop down the street that has 8 watches and pick up a pre-owned Patek Philippe or Audemars Piguet and know that it's real, know that it's going to be running perfectly and is not going to need a service in 3 weeks, which is going to cost them a lot of money, and they're not going to have to watch for a long time. So there's been a lot of consolidation in this space where consumers are really gravitating to the handful of global players that have our scale. And there's very few of us. So that's been driving a lot of our growth over the last few years.
Makes total sense. So let's transition a little bit. So, we've talked about kind of the idea that you can, enjoy your watches, you can own your watches. And if you kind of follow some of the rules that you laid out about brand quality, scarcity, et cetera, those watches could be worth the same amount more, when you ultimately decide to either sell them or, God forbid, you pass away. I'd like to get into kind of that last part. You did a LinkedIn post a few months ago that really kind of struck me, and we talked about it after you did it, or after you posted it, about the fact that there are a lot of times where we, obviously from our in our business, we're consulting or we're counseling families after a death, or God forbid a spouse is sick and they had knowledge about whether it was a family business or they were the ones managing the assets or whatever the case may be. And I always think to myself in those situations, I feel really good about the fact that we're giving quality, morally, ethically, highest quality advice to these families when they're in a position that they don't have all the information they need to make good decisions. And I never really thought about it from the standpoint of, collectibles, or from the standpoint of, like, in this case, a watch collection, so without giving specifics, talk a little bit, if you can, about, an example or so where, you've seen a watch collection show up like in an estate or something, and, how that can go really well for someone and how that can go really badly.
Yeah, we've had both scenarios a few times. The negative one that's happened actually a couple of times where, there's a death in the family and the widow will bring a set of watches that her husband, who was considered the watch collector in the family, used to wear, and trying to figure out, what they're worth. And unfortunately, we have to break her heart and tell her that these are, cheap fakes that, her husband probably bought on that boys trip in 1993 in Canal Street, New York, and they're not really worth anything. They're not real watches, which is often a disappointing and negative surprise. But we also had the scenario where somebody will bring, a scratched up vintage Patek, small size vintage Patek Philippe, trying to just to see if there's any value in it, and then we'll be surprised that we would pay them $60,000-$70,000 on the spot for that watch, which they weren't even sure is worth anything. So we've seen surprises both ways, which obviously the showing up with a bunch of fake watches that are in this state is a huge disappointment for the family.
So from your side of the table, if a collector wants to make life easier for their family, what are some of the basic things they should put in place today, whether that be inventory lists, appraisals, receipt? I know, you and I have talked a lot about making sure if you have the original box, papers, things like that. What's essential versus sort of nice to have?
Yeah, I think to make it the easiest for your families, you need to have everything itemized. You need to have information on where it was bought, receipts where it was bought, how much it was bought for. You need to have the serial number of each watch written out. You need to include whether there are the box and papers. You need to include where the watch is located, because a lot of people have multiple homes, and you need to say, this is in my Hamptons house, this is in my Boca residence. You should be able to find that there. Would definitely recommend then having a contact of the watch dealer you're most comfortable dealing with. Hopefully it's us, because again, it's a difficult time for the family. If they just take that collection to somebody there's no relationship with, they might use that opportunity to take advantage and offer them a low ball price and try to get the inventory off them at not a fair market value, which is not okay. Then the other thing that should be thought about is some of the mistakes that we sometimes see. There's a rush to sell the watches and not really thinking about, should any of these pieces be passed down to the grandkids? Because there's a lot of sentimental value in these pieces. So leaving instructions, whether you recommend selling the watches, or you want somebody in the family to have some of those watches and wear those watches, and that'll be a keepsake of the memory of you, is important. If you have those instructions, that would be very helpful for the family as they're deciding what they want to do with the collection. I think that would be probably the most important part of it. We're actually potentially working on a digital tool that will help our clients keep their collection all in one place and be able to load it up and be able to share it with their family easily, and also have all the pictures of the watches there and so forth.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was an app or some kind of digital way to do
Yeah,
that.
we're working on a My Collection tool, and hopefully it will show you the value of your collection and everything, and also have all those documents digitally in one place for you to be able to share with your family at any point in time.
That's awesome. So I think you already answered this, but if I was to glean from what you just said, the opposite, which is, the biggest mistakes you see people make when they inherit a watch collection, it sounds to me like first they maybe move too fast and go somewhere that's not necessarily reputable,
Yeah.
or they don't sit down and think about the sentimental value behind the collection and decide whether they would rather pass those assets on to other members of the family versus just having an immediate reaction to sell them.
Yeah. I mean, the watches are built to last 100 years. They'll run better than a car that you're driving for 10 years. So they need fewer tune-ups, and they're built to last. So there's no reason why someone's grandkids can't wear the vintage watch that you bought 30 years ago. And that's a great keepsake. The other things, we'll see people throw out the box and papers, not realizing there's value. They think it's just clutter, and the watch is the only thing that has value. And that's important to have, especially for vintage pieces. That's a game changer in terms of value. We've even had folks thinking they need to polish the watch themselves before bringing it here, and in the process ruining the watch because they found some kind of polishing kit online, and that actually just they ruined the value of the watch by doing it themselves instead of bringing it here, because they thought they need to clean it up before bringing it to show us, which is not the case at all. But yeah, those are the main things, and knowing where to take it to a trusted source like us, somebody that's not going to use the opportunity to take advantage of a family in grief.
Absolutely. So we've only got a couple minutes left, and thanks again for all this incredible information. So I thought maybe with the last couple minutes we do like a quick lightning round, 3 quick questions for you.
Sure.
Your personal opinion. So question 1, what's the one watch you wear the most and why?
So right now I mostly wear a Rolex Skydweller. It's actually the most complicated movement that Rolex makes, but it doesn't kind of shout at you. It's a stainless steel black dial. It's very sturdy, so I don't have to think about it. I could, if I'm playing sports, swimming in a pool, swimming in the ocean, on a boat, and it goes from day to night seamlessly. It's got annual calendar, dual time zone. It's a very advanced watch, very sturdy. So that's the one I wear the most right now, just because I don't have to worry about what I'm doing when I'm in it.
Yep.
It's I love the watch that you just picked up from us. If you want to share it with
For sure.
the viewers, it's a
So I just picked up a new Patek Philippe Nautilus. It's actually a 3710, which is an old model of the Nautilus. The today's versions with the blue dial are a newer model, 5711, I think. And so it was something that showed up on your website. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you have it. And this is
yeah.
one that this is
Even
one
though
that my kids will fight over.
what I love about it, it's like I think yours is a 2005. It's a 42 millimeter, which is pretty large for the older Nautilus models, and I think it's got this really cool design. And it was, I mean, they're producing them. I don't know. They probably made 500-600 a year at most of that model. So it's it definitely has appreciation potential, and it's a very limited production run for that model.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And like you said to me earlier, I'm having a hard time wearing other watches in my collection now that I have this one. But I'm doing my best to diversify, as you said.
Yeah.
So tell us, what's the most surprising trend in the watch world right now that you're seeing?
The most surprising trend, I would say, is that kind of what you touched on before. People think that you could only buy watches in the secondary market at over retail, or even a lot of the Patek Philippe inventory that we have is selling at 20-30% below retail. And that's because retail prices have gone up quite a bit in the last handful of years. So right now it's actually a really good time to buy pre-owned, and I think a lot of consumers don't realize that.
And last but not least, the question of all questions: if you were starting a watch collection today and money was no object, what would be the first watch that you would purchase?
Wow. I I think the most iconic watch ever made is the Rolex Daytona.
Yeah.
It's got the racing heritage. It's got like the perfect symmetry on the dial. It's got that heritage and cachet that it always keeps value and appreciates in value over time. There's a lot of varieties of it, from gold models to stainless steel models on Oyster Flex rubber straps, other straps, all kinds of different dial variations. But if I could buy only one watch and only wear one watch for the rest of my life, I think it would be one of the variations of a Rolex Daytona.
Good to know.
And again, we right now have about 45 Daytonas in inventory. So which is, that's probably more than every Rolex store in the Southeast combined at any point in time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So, Eugene, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with us. I did want to mention, I forgot to mention it before, but I did want to mention, you talked about the heritage of watches and, the sentimental value for family. The reason that I decided to start collecting watches myself was because I have a pocket watch that my grandfather smuggled out of the Holocaust when they were leaving Europe, and I've had it restored. But it is such a meaningful piece of my heritage that kind of, and I need to bring it in so that Jake
I'd love to see it. Yeah, I haven't seen it,
so you guys can see it. But that would, there are so many things that can speak to you when it comes to something like a collectible, like a luxury watch. And I think we did a good job today, I think, talking about the fact that this is not consumer spending. This is not going to the store and buying a pair of shoes. This can be a passion, this can be a collectible, and it can become an absolutely meaningful asset for people. But it only serves them out of the joy that they get out of having it, wearing it, etc. But just like anything else we talk to clients about, you should do it with intention. You should do it with quality. You should have, the best in class advisors advising you on, those purchases, and, just be thoughtful about it, document it properly, and plan for what happens, later on, God forbid, if you're not around, to make it so that those watches maintain their quality, their value, their provenance, etc.
Yeah, most watch consumers that buy a watch, it's because there's a story behind the purchase. They're celebrating some occasion, a life event. You bought your son a watch for graduation. 20, 30 years from now, he's going to look at that and remember that his graduation and this gift. People buy watches around weddings, a large promotion. So a lot of times the watch purchase really marks an important period in your life. So unlike, the portfolio you built for your customers, which I'm happy to be one of, they might not appreciate as quickly. They probably will give the customer a little bit more joy. No one's going to remember, like, I bought that Microsoft stock around my wedding, and like that's very sentimental. Whereas the watch will probably bring those memories back.
Excellent point. Eugene, thanks again for the time. For those of you listening, if you or someone you love has a watch collection, don't let it become kind of a mystery box for the next generation. Make sure it's on your balance sheet. If we're keeping up with your balance sheet, share that information with us. Same way you share, information about your other assets, but make sure it's documented. Talk to your advisors. Hopefully that's us, your attorneys, et cetera, about how you want those watches handled. So Eugene, thank you again for sharing your insights. Thanks for everybody for joining us for another episode of Financial Longevity. Hopefully you found this episode helpful. And if so, please follow the show, leave a rating or a review, and share the episode with someone who loves watches. Until the next time, we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Financial Longevity, the Merlin Wealth Management Educational Podcast. To learn more about Merlin Wealth Management, visit our website at rocco.com/Merlin. This material was prepared by Rockefeller Capital Management. The views expressed of the host and guests in this episode are as of a particular point in time and are subject to change without notice. The views expressed by the speakers are solely their own and may differ from or conflict with those of other divisions in Rockefeller Capital Management. This information was provided for illustrative and educational purposes only. From time to time, we may mention specific securities or investment strategies where we have an active position on behalf of ourselves and/or our clients. Any mentions of a specific security or company is purely casual and should not be construed as an investment recommendation, investment advice, an offer of Rockefeller investment advisory or brokerage services, or a projection or illustration of the performance of any particular investment or strategy offered by Rockefeller. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Before making any investment decisions, listeners should conduct their own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor to ensure that any investment is appropriate for their individual circumstances. Forward-looking statements, including those presented herein, are inherently uncertain, as future events may differ materially from those reflected, and past performance is not a guarantee of future performance.